That's my tutu impact. Archbishop Tutu.
I get the privilege of speaking to a large number of people at the Conduit, and this is an incredible treat because you are in the presence of one of the most important leaders of our time, a person who's done a remarkable range of things in her enormously distinguished career.
Paul, can I stop you there? Nobody needs to hear all of that. Let's get down to business. Let's get down to business.
Unnecessary modesty is one of the many. I got to know Mary Robinson because I worked for a while with Archbishop Tutu, and she worked with him in this remarkable institution called the Elders. And before we came on stage, we were picking which of Mary's many hats she should be wearing for this conversation. And that speaks to all the things she's done. So we're going to get to business, as she's admonished me to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Planetary Guardians. And tell us a little bit about that institution and what it seeks to do as a way of framing the conversation we're about to have.
Well, currently there are 20 guardians of the planetary boundaries. And when I say this to my grandchildren, they're very impressed. It's like Star Wars, it's a very impressive hat. But actually, it builds on the work of Johan Rockström. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. Quite a number of years ago now, but he could only afford to do a sort of report every 7 years on the planetary boundaries. There are 9 of them. Don't ask me to tell you all 9, I think I won't be able to remember. Climate is obviously one of them, the oceans, what we put up into the air, the ozone layer. In fact, the ozone layer is the boundary we retrieved. I'm sure many of you will remember the worry in the 80s that we were going to fry because the ozone layer was opening up because there were these chemicals. And then, happily, we learned and we got the Montreal Protocol and very quickly dealt with that. And that's one of the planetary boundaries that's in the green, if you like, not in the red. There are 6 at least, maybe coming up to 7 planetary boundaries where we're entering into danger zone. This is really worrying. And what I've learned from being a guardian of the planetary boundaries is the direct connection between the planetary health, the health of the systems that sustain us, and our health. It's really very interesting. It's, you could, and I think you talked about quite a bit of it today, because I understand there are a lot of health experts in the room, and the link between health and climate is so close. But it's more than climate. It's a planetary framing, because if you undermine biodiversity, I'm sure you talked about that, the impacts on food security, the pollination of bees, etc. If you talk about heat caused by carbon emissions, the deaths from heat, the worries about heat, even in London and Dublin to a certain extent. I mean, we're less hot usually, more rain, less heat. But we're very much in touch in Project Dandelion with SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, and they had so many of their members who were dying from their outdoor work, and now, happily, they've been able to get insurance from heat. So that's the other thing. But what the planetary boundaries is about is having a planetary health check every year at the UN General Assembly, and that tells us, how fragile and how connected these ecosystems are. And if we lose the coral reefs, if we lose the Arctic ice, how connected all of this is. And then we want to have science right up there in decision making. And this is really the last point I'll make about the planetary boundaries. We think, do you remember during COVID how much attention we paid to chief medical officers? Because we were scared. We were very scared. And we paid a lot of attention. We need planetary scientists, chief planetary scientists in countries that can, make the policy linked to not just science, but actually planetary science, the holistic approach. And I think there's so much value in that.
So the Planetary Guardians, a group of distinguished people across the world who do the annual health check, who send out a clarion call about the risks that we're facing, that reaffirm the science, and then issue a call to action. if it were that easy, we would all be doing it. And so I guess the question I want to ask you, you've had so many hats. You've been a head of state. You've played a crucial role at the UN as the High Commissioner. You've convened a whole bunch of civil society organizations. You played a leading role in the elders. You are well placed to say what kind of leadership we need at this moment. This room knows the facts. They don't need to be told the facts. They know the linkages. They have many of the solutions. We seem to be in short supply of effective leadership at this moment. How do we get from where we are to where we need to be?
I think we need a combination of the leaders who are at the important tables, because they make the decisions, and it's very important that as many of them as possible make the right decisions. At the moment, we're in a really difficult position because our multilateral system is cracking, and it's the worst of times, actually, particularly because of the United States, because the leadership of President Trump doesn't believe in collaboration with other countries, multilateralism. It's America first, and it's transactional, and it's about power, and it's about lots of other dark things that we needn't go into. That's not good for the international system, but we still need as many countries being part of the coalition of willing countries to maintain what is so important for the world: rule of law, international rule of law, the messy but necessary diplomacy of COPs. We need to improve COPs, make them smarter and more effective, but we need them. And as well as that, we need an extraordinary community building up of civil society. And I use the word community deliberately, and I'm trying to think of the Brazilian word. Is there a Brazilian in the room that can tell me the lovely word? Muchara. Yeah, that's right. Very good. Well, there's an Irish word, mehel. There's Ubuntu in South Africa, but actually there's a human rights framing, which I really want to emphasize. A lot of people think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in terms of Article 1, and it's a lovely article. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And dignity comes before rights, which is really very important. But we've individualized rights too much. Yes, we need women's rights, children's rights. We need to focus on the individual, but we also need Article 29, which says everyone has duties to the community in which alone they reach the free and full expression of their personality. Isn't that very interesting? You have to know you have duties to the community, do something about it, and then you yourself have grown somehow. You're more rounded. You know. Many people say, I know that when I give to others, I get back far more. I mean, you would have known that with Archbishop Tutu. And we need communities to grow and work together to show that we are actually moving in the right direction. We are on the cusp of a much better, fairer, safer, healthier world. It is just around the corner. We're moving, but we're not moving fast enough because we somehow are not connected, and we don't know our strength. And we don't connect what all the communities are doing, which is what Project Dandelion, we as women leaders are trying to do, to have this radical connection, radical communication, radical collaboration to help the decision makers at the top. If they don't feel the pressure, and they don't at the moment, the focus is elsewhere. It's on these awful conflicts at the moment, on defence, on defence spending, cutting back ODA in order to build up defence, especially in Europe at the moment because of the war in Ukraine. So we need this combination of the still countries of the willing who understand the importance of international rule of law, international collaboration, multilateral dialogue, etc., and communities taking the responsibility as communities, not just as individuals, to be the swell up of support for that.
I'm so glad you invoked Ubuntu. It is the motto of the Conduit, and every day we say to ourselves and the team and our members that I am because we are, and that we have obligations to each other, and that we're more effective, more resilient, more creative, more entrepreneurial, kinder, happier, more generous when we affirm the connections between each other. And stitching ourselves towards each other and building those networks is civilization's great work. So,
and look what young people are doing.
Yes.
Young climate activists. I mean, I'm so impressed when I have intergenerational conversations now, as I had even earlier today with a young Brazilian climate activist, and they're so connected. And it's across all boundaries, and it's, as you say, exactly as you say, the Ubuntu spirit.
So, the one strategy is, let's just drop an Ubuntu bomb on all our societies and create the sense of building this fertility and these connections and create change from the bottom up. I want to, and that seems a self-evidently correct, and everybody in this room is doing this in their own way, and we need more of it, and we need more people to collaborate. I want to ask you the question from the other way around, not from the bottom up, but from the top down. You've sat with the elders and as a head of state where you've seen what are the characteristics of exceptional leaders. And I'd like you to just maybe reflect on that a little bit. What did you see when you rubbed shoulders with leaders who were exceptional and good for the world? What qualities did they embody? And how do we produce more of those?
I would say the qualities are relatively simple. Humility, service, the idea, if I'm elected in particular by the people of my country, I'm there to serve them. And therefore, whatever I do, it must be for them, but also with them, bringing them with me on the journey together. And that's also very much part of it. And frankly, it's not necessarily a relevant thing, and yet it is. I find with the elders, for example, humor helps greatly, because humor is a very humanizing thing. And that's why I did my silly little dance coming up here, and people, because in a way, we need to move people from the heart. We need to, and leadership is about that. Leadership that can really move people is, and it has to also be leadership of integrity, leadership of principle, leadership where you're prepared to pay a price and be unpopular at times, because you've got to be true to the real sense of a vision for your people, or a vision for the issues that you believe in.
Where do you come down on this sort of debate about, in this moment where there's an enormous sort of chilling atmosphere that has descended on the world, right? If you say the wrong things, you may have your funding cut, or your university closed down, or your entrance to a place denied, or corporates suddenly can't say things that in the boardroom they were saying with great conviction a few years ago. And the boundary between principle and prudence is something that leaders have to think about a lot. Yes. So what's your reflection on that?
Yeah, it's certainly a moment where the fear factor is greater than I've ever known. And it leads to censorship of people outside the realm of the fear, if I could put it that way. And that is annoying. There's a lot of censorship going on far away from being impacted by autocratic leaders of one sort or another, and I'm thinking particularly what's happening in the United States at the moment. But there are others who are somehow, normalizing this and, kowtowing to it in a way that is not acceptable. At the same time, when you are in a situation where you've got to worry about your university or your workplace or you've probably got to, in the short term, stick to your principles, but don't necessarily talk about those wonderful words, diversity, equality. You can stick to the principles without necessarily using DEI. I think that's the smarter way to continue to believe that rule of law is absolutely essential, that DEI and ESG are important steps forward that we found, but we don't need to necessarily use the precise titles, especially for corporations based in the United States at the moment, and so on.
So I did an interview about 6 weeks ago with the with the head of the Wellcome Trust. And one of the most staggering things he said in the course of the interview was that the cuts in global aid, particularly in public health, is likely to have an impact in excess mortality terms higher than COVID, which is a kind of shattering statistic that a series of decisions taken somewhat capriciously can have that much of
Leave out the somewhat.
Capriciously can have that much of an impact. So, and you've seen, regrettably, in this country, cuts to aid in order to fund arms from a pretty progressive government, in all things being equal. So, if you were to advise us on how you go about making the case again for multilateralism, for an investment in public health by the state, in addition to organizations like Wellcome and the people here, how would you make that case to persuade leaders that that's not the path they should be going on?
Maybe I'll make the case in the way that the elders are trying to suggest we need a case for long view leadership, which is leadership that knows that we can't resolve the problems that we face, the existential threats, the climate and nature crisis, the planetary crisis, the nuclear weapons crisis, which is at the moment more at risk than it's ever been, and the pandemic crisis, because we still haven't fully learned. We've got the pandemic treaty, which is weak, but at least we have a treaty. But we need much more. All of those need collaboration based on reason and basically science, and multilateral frameworks, because no country or no region can deal with them on their own. And they also need empathy, understanding that people are affected differently by these decisions. And when we were talking about our long view leadership, we were also taking part in intergenerational conversations. We actually held an event at the UN General Assembly last September with younger leaders in their late 30s, early 40s, on existential threats, on exactly this type of long view leadership. And it was a great conversation. We realized we'd learned a lot from that conversation. And then at other times during the UN General Assembly, we were with much younger climate activists, much younger people talking about their perspective. So we've now kind of modified our original idea of long view leadership, and we say long view leadership and co-creation between different generations. Think about if we had a world where we had the wit and the sense to know we need the longer view, but we also need the input of different generations. Those in their 30s and 40s and 50s, but also those in late teens, early 20s, different perspectives. I think that's really, really important, because there's a shared knowledge base now that and people are very creative and very able to see the world in a particular way that we need to listen to. I need to listen to.
So Archbishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela would always say it's always darkest before dawn. And it's in these moments of depth and despair, the depths of apartheid, hearing people who have experienced their children being assassinated in the Truth Commission, that you feel the highest amounts of sadness and despair. But in those moments, you also see light, and you see turning points, and you see causes for optimism. So give us your reflections on optimism now. Like, what are the things that ought to be stealing us for the next couple of years when the cycle of history returns to greater normality?
Well, rather than optimism, because I learned this from Archbishop Tutu, I say prisoner of hope. But there is so much going on in the world, and a lot of it has to do with what we're talking about. A lot of people are trying to make life better at local level. And we've touched on that, and I think we really need to re-emphasize it. And if you look at the Paris Treaty, we were heading for a world of at least 4 degrees of warming at that time. We knew it, and we were scared. It's now come down to about 2.6, 2.7 degrees. It's still not acceptable. That's not tolerable. But we have achieved, and I think we need to have the perspective of progress. We have made a lot of progress on, child mortality, maternal health, lots of things. The trouble is, the cutbacks at the moment are undermining that, and that's a very grim moment, as you say, a dark moment. And there are so many people suffering. I know so many stories, and so do you, of lives being lost. And look at Gaza. Look at what's happening there. I mean, to have in real time, because it's on our social media every day, children starving, being shot at, families being shot at when they're desperately trying to get food for their families. These are very heavy, difficult things. I think, to some extent, they prey on our mental health. It's hard when you know that this is going on, know what's happening in Sudan, which is so neglected, and know now that these attacks on Iran are going to distract everyone, and we're going to think even less of the other problems. So we need a kind of determination to keep focusing on humanity, on the need to understand that we are one human family, on the need to have a vision for this world that is a better world, that is a safer world. And part of it, of course, is to deal with the planetary crisis that we're in, the planetary health crisis and the human health crisis that goes with it, to do, every day what we can on that. But more than that, it's coalitions of the willing to reinforce. It's still completely true that rule of law, international rule of law, is what keeps the world a bit safer. And once we start undermining that, we get all these wars. It's very clear. So we don't have to reinvent wheels. We do need a reformed UN. We always did. When I became UN High Commissioner, there had been a reform package that gave the Office of High Commissioner a lot of new responsibility, and et cetera, et cetera. And we need that. We need that sense of reforming, but we need institutions and rule of law and a sense of fairness and equity. And we need this more and more, because one of the things we haven't talked about is the misrepresentation, the disrepresentation, actually the attack on truth itself. That worries me greatly, which brings me back precisely to the importance of community, to the importance of spaces like this, the importance of our conversation here, actually, because we are talking and we're listening to each other and we're believing in essential truths. Let me give you a personal example. There is a Facebook image of me, and I recognize myself. It's done presumably with AI and all this fancy stuff. And I'm saying, I'm asking people to buy bonds or something. I have never heard of them, and please don't buy them if you ever see this. But the wording includes, I'm your former president, you can trust me. And this really hurts me. But this is only the beginning of the kind of worries that we need to have about what is truth. We have to be very, very strong now in understanding what really matters. And what really matters is our relationship with each other. Archbishop Tutu was right. It is Ubuntu, and then Ubuntu writ larger and larger, spreading out from the local to the national to the international, but it's that sense of people coming together in strength, in determination. And I love a phrase of Kofi Annan's that he used very often, especially as an elder. He would say, you are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. And I think there's something very nice about that, being young, going for it, but also learning and listening and improving.
We're out of time. We have to end. But a coalition of the willing and a coalition of the possible galvanized together to solve things. And too old and too young is just a wonderful way to end. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.